And welcome back, everybody. I bet you didn't expect that short of a pause. Aha! But we are here to please, of course. We are back with the Victory Road Galar Farewell tournament. Of course, the final of Victory Road's Sword and Shield tournaments they're going to be hosting. Of course, sponsored by GGtoor, of which we saw a very encapsulating and exciting top 16 set just now, which was phenomenal. Very world-class sort of caliber players battling it out with a sort of revenge story going on in the midst of it.
Absolutely. Joe UX9 against Tomoyuki. It was a fairy tale matchup, wasn't it? It was fantastic to see Tomoyuki come out on top that particular time around. But my word, the competition is really heating up here as we take a look at the top 8 bracket. We can see the final 8 players in the Victory Road Galar Farewell, sponsored by GGtoor. We have Juan Manuel up against Victor Medina, Federico against Mattie Morgan, and that is the match that we're about to be covering. Gaetano versus Shu, and then Tomoyuki versus Luciano.
Yes, and I was going to say, as you mentioned Luciano, my eye did catch that the cute little jellyfish Pokemon in the bottom right corner there. Which, oh my lord, I am such a fan, and I hope we're able to see that on stream today.
Absolutely, that Jellicent there, that's a Pokemon you don't see very often, especially in Series 12. And you know what, I'm all about the bringing the niche picks in this particular tournament. It's the last one in Sword and Shield. May as well have some fun with it. But certainly a very exciting match coming up here with Federico and Mattie. And we can see from the top 8 bracket here that they have a mirror match with just the one slight alteration between them in the Gastrodon colouring, which of course doesn't make any difference to its stats. But some loyal fans of Gastrodon East, the blue one that Mattie is running, versus the Gastrodon West, the pink one that Federico is running.
Yes, so of course, naturally, there's going to be a divide of preference between Gastro East, Gastro West, Gastro Don't. We've got a lot of stuff going on here. But it will be very, very exciting indeed, of course. We're going to be seeing it from Mattie Morgan's point of view, where Mattie's gone ahead and he's got a couple of very good achievements for him accumulated across over the years. Top 4 in the Malmo Regionals 2020, I believe it was the final Regionals pre-COVID, if I'm not mistaken. The top 8 in the Champions Cup online tournament, one of the biggest ever hosted for VGC. Series 9 challenge winner in a Zelda tournament, I believe a high roller sort of tournament setup. And day 2 in Worlds for this year, 2022. And of course, we've got Federico on the other hand.
That's where we have Federico on the other side of the field. I was going to say briefly about Mattie. I feel like it's just a flex in itself having a regionals from 2020 just because they're so hard to come by. Mattie has that there, but of course Federico, his achievements looking towards them. 2 times internationals runner-up, 3 times regional champion, looking like those are in the senior division, and he's reached Worlds Day 2 twice. So players that aren't to be sniffed at, players that can give each other a real run for their money, and they will be wanting to approach this with the right frame of mind.
Oh, 100%, especially when both of these trainers are at 7-1 from their Swiss record of yesterday. So they've got a lot to going for themselves. They seem like they're on really good form. And it's quite tough because it's going to be mind games galore, Charlie. We've got a mirror match and oh my lord, we are in for a very juicy one.
A really juicy one indeed. Yeah, both players are running exactly the same team. We seems like there's a little change on Federico's side there. Perhaps a little typo there, but it should be a mirror match that we're going to see coming out from both of these trainers. And in that situation, it's a question of it's the same Pokemon, but of course the way they're trained may well be completely different. And a question of trying to anticipate what your opponent is going to be doing with their particular run of those Pokemon. And there we see there in the graphic that mirror match coming to the fore. The Gastrodon on either side of the field, since there are no water types on the other side, possibly isn't going to be the most useful, but who knows? We've been surprised by Gastrodon before, Costa.
We most definitely have. Having that sort of support mechanic, or should I say feature to that Gastrodon, having the Yawn axis, makes a lot of sense. There are a couple of Gastrodons that do still run Recover as an option, but a lot tend to not. It just depends on the sort of set and situation that you got, because it's there for a main check, like you said, against a Zacian Kyogre, namely the Swordfish archetype. but it can still put in the work. Zacians, unless they have play rough, they can't deal as much damage as they would like on the Gastrodon, which in turn can super effectively deal a lot of damage to them whilst keep that pressure going from the Yawn.
That's right, yeah, Yawn, it can really turn the tides of a battle from that passive little Gastrodon. But we'll have to see if it comes out at all. And of course, we see the Charizard on both sides, with the Groudon on both sides. And the Charizard is going to be able to benefit from the sun that the Groudon sets up just by coming into the field massively. And be able to deal out some really big G-Max wildfires that will be presumably honing down in on the Zacian on either side of the field, because it does not want to receive one of those. The fire-type moves are super effective against the Zacian. But of course, we also see the Grimmsnarl on both sides of the field, and that Grimmsnarl may well be able to set up some screens and increase the survivability of the teams.
Yes, and I think I do really like the fact that you mentioned that Grimmsnarl. It is likely, at least from my point of view, going to be a big key player here. When it comes to mirror matches, you want to try to make sure at least you get some coverage and disrupt any of your opponent's strategies, especially in a mirror match sort of context, either by going ahead and readjusting the damage counts, getting those screens, like you mentioned, for the entirety of your team for a set amount of turns, depending on whether there's a light play being held by the Grimmsnarl or not, or going for those Thunder Waves. I know, I may have jinxed it. We're going to see a lot of Thunder Waves, but let's hope that's not the case. But if it is, we shall see. There tends to be the sort of scenario when you got these archetypes going on, the Zacian, Groudon, especially with the Charizard. There's going to be a bit of situations regarding to the speeds and the training of each of these Pokemon, which one's trained to be faster, which one's trained to be slower, but more bulky. And there's a lot of sort of different situations to take into account, because we don't even know if all of the moves are the same. Just because the 6 Pokemon are the same, let's say ignoring the fact that Gastro East, Gastro West, we don't know the training and the move types. They may vary quite a bit.
That's right, they may well vary quite a bit, as well as the items held on these Pokemon. And I was going to say, Costa, I feel like it's only fitting that we have this classic Rinya Sun archetype here going up against each other, which was, of course, the archetype that made waves as soon as it was sort of invented early on in Series 12. It was the first archetype to really dominate the format. And so how fitting, as we say farewell to Series 12, say farewell to Galar, that we see Rinya Sun against Rinya Sun in a celebration of the menace that this particular archetype can cause.
It's true. I mean, you can't have just generally speaking, season 2022 without your good old Rinya Sun, because it's got to fit in somewhere. It's such a strong archetype. It can cover with a lot of general teams that you will encounter, which, for example, maybe more niche, maybe more geared towards controlling the over obsessive amount of Kyogre Zacians that are out there. We have seen a lot of variations. I think there was a build up to Worlds 2022 where we started seeing a weakness policy Charizard. And I know a couple of trainers that I'm friends with had definitely brought a couple of weakness policy Charizards to kind of stir up the meta at the time. So this may even be a scenario that we may be encountering.
Yeah, it was fascinating to see that at Worlds. It was suddenly everywhere. It seemed like it was nowhere, and then all of a sudden, Worlds Day 1, you see a Charizard and you expect it to hold the weakness policy, which of course is an item that, once it's activated by a super effective move, assuming the Pokemon survives the hit, will give a +2 boost to both the physical attack and the special attack to the holder of the weakness policy. We'll have to see if the Charizard here is running a weakness policy. It's an interesting choice of weakness policy when you have no Pokemon on your side to be able to proc the weakness policy themselves. And we may well see that here. I'm not sure which Pokemon would be best suited to set up the Charizard's weakness policy, if indeed that is the item it would be holding. But of course, that is just one potential item. There are all sorts of things the Charizard can hold, and we're going to see as we get into Game 1 here, and the locking in of the moves, and we've got Incineroar versus Grimmsnarl on both sides.
Oh, yeah, talk about mirror match. We've got a mirror lead as well for Game 1. A lot of various options that you could go down towards if you're both of these trainers, whether Mattie or Federico. But I think this is going to be a passive play, maybe a fake out to stop the opposing Grimmsnarl, or some switch outs and pivots, as we do actually see the Grimmsnarl from Federico's side switching in for that Groudon.
That's right, Groudon coming straight in, setting up the sun weather condition, and we'll have to see if there's a responding switch on Mattie's side, which there isn't, and we do see the fake out, as you were saying, Costa, going into the Groudon, but now we have the confirmation that Mattie's Incineroar is faster than Federico's, because its fake out went off first, unless, of course, that was a speed tie. But we see the Spirit Break coming out from Grimmsnarl into the Groudon, doing a little bit of chip damage, which never goes amiss.
No, definitely does not. It does stack up over time, but I do really like Federico's play there, wanting to make sure that Mattie's Incineroar does not leave the field, or at least it could get a bit of chip damage on any Pokemon that decides to stay in, that switches in, sorry. So we've got a situation where Groudon can just click the Precipice Blades button and not feel too worried unless it, of course, does miss, or maybe there's a Charizard that switches in, but regardless, Mattie's going to have to try to adapt to this, as we do see he does the same. He goes for the Incineroar switch out, now for that Groudon coming in.
That's right. Meanwhile, the Grimmsnarl on Mattie's side goes for a Reflect, which boosts the physical defense of both players on Mattie's side. As we see a Precipice Blades coming out from Federico, which does get the double connect, doesn't do too much damage through that Reflect, as we see a parting shot from the Incineroar, lowering the Groudon's attack stat, as it will go rushing back to Federico to bring out a Pokemon that's in the back.
Yeah, and it makes a lot of sense, because once again, you've got all the offensive pressure on your side of the field if you're Federico. You want to try to mix and match and slowly board position yourself better so you can have that advantage. And I think the fact that we're already seeing some damage being dealt both onto the Grimmsnarl and the Groudon makes a lot of sense. Incineroar can openly go ahead and switch in if it so chooses to now. It just has to be aware of each of the Groudons that are on the field. So in this situation, I would say Federico so far has been the victor of the initial turns, but as we know, it's VGC, these things do change, all within just one switch out or even one turn.
That's right, these things can change in an instant, but you're right, Federico's side of the field has more health remaining to it. Of course, it's early days, it's not that too much damage has been dealt to Mattie's side of the field, but we see the Incineroar coming in for the Grimmsnarl on Mattie's side, which is going to lower the attack stat of the Groudon and the Grimmsnarl, meaning that any damage coming out from the Groudon on Federico's side is going to be reduced. As we see the Reflect coming out from Federico's Grimmsnarl, staggering it so it will have one more turn than Mattie's did. Oh, and we have our first... Oh, it's a double Precipice Blaze miss. And I thought we were going to have a triple one there, but it's a double Precipice Blaze miss from Mattie's Groudon. Never what you want to see. But the Sugar Berry on the Incineroar means that it can withstand the Precipice Blaze coming out from Federico's Groudon much better.
No, it most definitely does, and very unfortunate miss there. You, as a Groudon, you just want to hope as a trainer that you can go ahead and see those successful misses and hits and no sort of evades being propped up. So in the scenario that we're at, Mattie may be a bit behind with regards to damage that's being dealt, but I think both of the trainers having Reflects being set up makes a lot of sense, as you actually see Mattie bringing that Charizard in. That might be a really good play following up in the next turn.
That's right, which of course is immune to the Precipice Blaze that the Groudon dishes out, and the Incineroar takes it very well with the attack drops that the Groudon on Federico's side of the field has taken. And now we see Mattie locking in his moves for his Charizard and Incineroar. And let's face it, Costa, Series 12, saying goodbye to Galar, what would that be without a double Precipice Blades miss? It's the risk that you run when you have Groudon. It's not a 100% accurate move. It's something you never want to see, but we've got it out of the way now. Hopefully, all of Mattie's future Precipice Blades will connect.
Yes, we shall see, of course. Left to be seen, no doubt, from both of the Groudons. But in this situation, having the Charizard repositioned to the point where it is the fastest thing on the field, it can threaten huge amounts of damage with any sort of Wildfire setup, makes a lot of sense. And even if this is an Incineroar coming in, if a G-Max Wildfire in the sun decides to go into that Incineroar slot, it's still going to be dealing a lot of damage. But because I do think, taking into consideration a rock-type move coming out from the Groudon makes a lot of sense if you are Mattie in this scenario.
That's right, and we had a lot of board position changes there, but now we do see Mattie committing to the Dynamax on his Charizard. Of course, it goes into its Gigantamax form, Charizard being a Pokemon that is capable of that, and as you were saying, Costa, it will be able to deal out some massive damage with a G-Max Wildfire, if that is the move it chooses to go for. But we see a Thunder Wave. You did jinx it, Costa. We see the Thunder Wave coming out from the Grimmsnarl, into the Charizard, and it's a full paralysis onto Mattie's Dynamax Charizard, and that's one turn of his Dynamax already gone. He only has 2 remaining, and he has Paralysis to deal with now. We could well be seeing a situation in which the Charizard isn't able to get anything out of his Dynamax, but I have my fingers crossed for Mattie that won't be the case. The Charizard will be able to battle through the Paralysis. We'll just have to hope, Costa.
I think definitely got the jinxes going. Definitely the situation. Not quite fortunate game 1 so far for Mattie, to say the least. As Sun not being on the field does mean reduced damage output. Paralysis does mean halved speed, as well as potential full paralysis to take into consideration. And you've already used up 1 turn of Dynamax, so it's not looking good at all. This may already be game deciding in Federico's favor, as he's just going to go ahead and start setting up a light screen, which will further reduce that damage output of the Charizard.
That's right, and we see an answered light screen on Mattie's side of the field as well, but certainly Federico has the advantage in terms of a non-paralyzed Dynamax option, which he still hasn't used in the back, but we see a Flare Blitz coming out from Incineroar into the Grimmsnarl. Oh no, and it's another full paralysis on Charizard on Mattie's side of the field, so he's really not able to benefit from this Dynamax turn at all.
No, he really isn't, and all of a sudden, I hope it's not the case, but I do feel like being able to just not to nullify your opponent's Dynamax moves to nothing, to 0 for 2 turns in a row, whilst it being a Charizard that is now subject to having half of its damage or half of its speed essentially active, is really tough. And in this scenario, you need to try, if you're Federico, take advantage, try to preserve your Dynamax and only bring it up at the appropriate time. Maybe when the screens are starting to run out, or at least you've gotten rid of some key factors for Mattie's strategy.
That's right. It's so crushing to see this Charizard having such a rubbish time, but the Grimmsnarl does survive on 18 health. That Flare Blitz as a foul play comes out from the Grimmsnarl. Oh, and it is a triple paralysis on Mattie's Charizard. No. Absolutely awful, although it is again quite fitting to see in a Galar Farewell tournament that the downsides potentially of Dynamax, what can happen if you're not careful. And I'm sure as Mattie locks in his moves here, he's thinking, well, at least I don't have to deal with Dynamax ever again when Scarlet and Violet come around.
Yeah, I mean, I would pretty much argue you don't have to deal against Grimmsnarl Thunder Waves, but we shall see when that game comes out and if it's available. But in this scenario, yeah, I think it's so strong being able to have a Grimmsnarl with the Thunder Wave pressure. It's kind of what we said, Rinja Sun is strong for a reason, for multiple reasons, but that Grimmsnarl is definitely one of those reasons. Being able to just essentially flinch your opponent while having half of its speed taken away from it, it's quite tough. As we are going to be seeing another screen being set up now from Federico's side, followed up with an Incineroar Flare Blitz into that Groudon slot, dealing respectable amounts of damage, thanks to the Sun now being available on the field, as the Blast Burn, my lord, deals so much damage, picks up the KO on Grimmsnarl. Even with the light screen set up, it's just too much damage. It's a 150 base power move, even though Charizard won't be able to move the following turn now. It doesn't matter, because it's quite tough in the full paralysis state at the minute.
Yeah, Charizard deciding that the perfect time to break free of its paralysis was when it wasn't Dynamaxed. I think Mattie will be having some chats with that Charizard after this game. But I'm quite worried now, Costa, because we see the Charizard coming out from Federico's side of the field. It's full health. There's no Grimmsnarl on Mattie's side currently. Yep. And he still has the Dynamax advantage, so it really is looking overwhelmingly in Federico's favor at this point.
Yeah, it most definitely is, and from what it looks like, Federico has gone ahead and gone for the Dynamax. Makes a lot of sense. You've got G-Max Charizard available in the field, just out to route a lot of damage. And in this scenario, setting up Wildfire makes a lot of sense. You don't need to worry about the Charizard slot at all, so you can always guarantee target into the Groudon slot, which we will see. G-Max Wildfire comes out, and of course, at that low of HP, it will most certainly pick up the KO, which does leave the Incineroar potentially going ahead for a parting shot. Maybe want to try to reposition here if you're Federico.
Perhaps, although it is in fact the Flare Blitz, which I can only imagine he was doubling up into the Groudon just in case, although maybe he was just going for the chip damage onto the Charizard. And it is only a little bit of damage, but of course the Charizard this turn on Mattie's side of the field is a sitting duck, having just used the, or sitting dragon I should say, having just used the Blast Burn, meaning it has to take a turn to recharge, as Mattie now has to decide which Pokemon to bring in instead of that Groudon in face of this big Charizard with its fiery wings.
Yeah, and I think in this scenario, if you're Mattie, you kind of keep on playing just to see if you can find out a bit more information where need be, or kind of strategize on what your game plan is going to be in Game 2, because I think at this point, Mattie could have even forfeited maybe a turn or two ago, but being able to kind of see what types of damage calculations are set out from Federico's Pokemon, as well as the item choice, if you could try to figure out, see if there's a Life Orb on the Charizard or not. All of these sort of things do build up to strategizing over Game 2 and how he's going to try to bring this back, because that was just Game 1. There's a lot going on, but it was just Game 1. We're going into Game 2 right now.
That's right, we're going into Game 2, and God, well, if there's one thing Mattie will have learned from that game, it's that Grimmsnarl is annoying. I'm sure he knew it already, but it's something that perhaps he'll want to deal with sooner this time around, especially if he's going to risk a Dynamax in front of it. Always fascinating to see a mirror match, and as expected, at the beginning of that match, we saw lots of repositioning, trying to outwit the other player. It's mind game heavy whenever you have a mirror match, but sometimes in Pokemon, it can just take the one turn for an advantage to come to the fore, and that is what we saw here, as Mattie had the saddest Dynamax I think I've ever seen, with a triple paralysis on that Charizard.
Yeah, it was indeed very sad. Very unfortunate for the Charizard. But I think what Mattie may have to try to take into account, and I think what anyone has to take into account when going up against Rinyasun, especially with an annoying Grimmsnarl Thunder Waves, is where are your ground types? Try to make sure that maybe you could defensively position yourself so you could avoid any sort of Thunder Waves being or affecting your Pokemon. Maybe have a substitute if your Zacian has one. Once again, it depends on the sets of these Pokemon, but you need to try to mitigate this hacks-heavy sort of strategy with the Thunder Waves. Because naturally, let's say, for example, as a trainer, maybe with Federico, you're not trying to go for the paralysis. They're a nice thing, but you're trying to go for the speed control. You're trying to make sure that, right, let me just try to checkmate this Pokemon by getting it to have half speed, and then I can use this other Pokemon to completely, essentially just get rid of it and checkmate it in the process. So in this scenario, Mattie's just going to have to be a bit more cautious about the switch-ins and about the fact that there's a Grimmsnarl on the field. Like you said, Charlie, how can I try to dispose of it as quickly as possible before it sort of, just takes a toll on your current status for all your Pokemon?
Absolutely, and Grimmsnarl, with its cheeky little prankster-looking little face, it's not a Pokemon you want to have sticking around for too long. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Costa, I believe we saw the same four Pokemon coming out from both Mattie and Federico there. And of course, another thing to bear in mind about the Grimmsnarl is that Thunder Wave isn't 100% accurate. Nope. So there can be a world in which the Grimmsnarl goes for the Thunder Wave and the opponent gets lucky and dodges the Thunder Wave in return. But obviously, that's never a strategy you want to rely on. So it really was a true mirror match there with the same four Pokemon, and we'll have to see if Mattie makes any kinds of adjustments. Although, with Rinyasun, I imagine Rinyasun is quite well versed at playing Rinyasun, and so I believe that these trainers will have spent some time deciding that these are the best four Pokemon to bring. But we'll have to see as we get into Game 2, as you see the same lead from Federico in the Incineroar and the Grimmsnarl, but this time Mattie responds with a Charizard lead and a Grimmsnarl.
Yes, so Mattie kind of wants to try to go on the offensive turn one and say, right, I want to be able to position myself to the point where I can deal huge amounts of damage to either of Federico's passive leads, if he so chooses to go about that route, as we did see he has done and so. In this situation, Charizard can be used as bait in hoping to switch out to a Groudon here in anticipation of a Thunder Wave, but that is if Federico is going to catch that bait and go for it, instead of just setting up his own screens and play a bit more passively and defensively going into the subsequent turn.
That's right, and this time we do see a switch up of Pokemon from Mattie in the Zacian that's hiding in the back, and that Charizard is protecting itself from any pesky Thunder Waves that do indeed come out from the Grimmsnarl, as we see Incineroar trying to go for a passing shot onto the Charizard to add insult to the potential injury of the Thunder Wave, but through that protect, the Charizard remains unaffected. So a double up from Federico that was very well managed by Mattie indeed.
Yeah, very good change there. Very good defensive switch as well. Going for the protect and the switch makes a lot of sense. Now you've got Zacian all of a sudden that can checkmate this Grimmsnarl. There is no Incineroar on the back as it is on the field, which means any sort of Pokemon that does decide to switch in for that Grimmsnarl, if Federico does want to preserve it, will likely take huge amounts of damage. So in this scenario, I think it makes sense. Federico is aware of this. He may try to go ahead and get a Thunder Wave off on the Zacian, maybe hoping for RNG to roll his way, but we shall find out as Mattie switches the Charizard in for out for the Grimmsnarl.
That's right, as we see a light screen going up for Federico from his Grimmsnarl, and a Behemoth Blade going into the Grimmsnarl with a Babiri Berry reveal, meaning that it will be able to take that super effective Steel attack much better than it would have done otherwise, and it is just enough to survive that Behemoth Blade. So what an annoying Grimmsnarl. It's sticking around for at least another turn as a parting shot comes out from the Incineroar onto Mattie's Grimmsnarl.
Yeah, and wow, I thought surely the Grimmsnarl is going to be going down here if it stays on the field. Like, no. Federico's Grimmsnarl is like, yeah, I'm carrying this berry that you can't see in my pocket right now, and it kind of helps in this scenario. Seeing the parting shot going out into the Grimmsnarl makes a lot of sense. You still want to try to prioritize that slot. It's very free, unless for whatever reason Mattie tries to go for a double protect there, which it wouldn't make a lot of sense for him to do so. And we do have Groudon all of a sudden on the field. Whilst there are double Grimmsnarls on the side. So Groudon in a position to deal good amounts of damage.
Oh, and we see a quick attack coming out from the Zacian, which just takes out that Grimmsnarl. Mattie will be so relieved to have that Grimmsnarl finally taken care of. Revenge from what it did to his Charizard in the previous game. As we see screens coming out from the Grimmsnarl and a Precipice Blades, it's a double connect, but it takes the Zacian down to just under half of its health. The Grimmsnarl surviving on on more like 3/4 of its health to 2/3, as the Incineroar comes in from Federico, meaning it will lower the attack of the Grimmsnarl and the Zacian on Mattie's side of the field.
Yeah, exactly that. And in this scenario, Mattie's in a much better position in comparison to Game 1. I think he's been able to strategize and correctly identify the sort of initial threats coming out from Federico's strategy, just trying to make sure that, okay, cool, I need to be able to better position myself. I want to have options and the good sort of synergy, so I could be a bit more flexible and have an advantageous sort of point on the board state, as we're seeing yet another switch in.
That's right, another switch, and then the other screen going up from Grimmsnarl there with the light screen as Groudon on Mattie's side comes in, and we do have a Precipice Blades miss, this time in Mattie's favour, having had a double miss last time, and it only goes into the Grimmsnarl, and parting shot comes out from the Incineroar into the Grimmsnarl, meaning it will be able to pivot back out into something else, meaning that the Intimidate of the Incineroar will be able to come back in at a later stage to drop another Intimidate and another attack drop.
Yeah, and the pivot play, once again, makes a lot of sense. You want to keep on changing that board state to your advantage, because given these sort of matchups, especially with the mirrors and the Pokemon that are involved, you want to keep on going and make sure that you're not stale, that you're not idle, that you're not allowing sort of your opponent to take advantage and go for, let's say, adaptation and essentially kind of rule out one of your Pokemon, checkmate one of your Pokemon. So in this scenario, being able to, let's say, if you're Mattie on your side of the field, have screens set up, go for the damage, maybe threaten a Rock-type move onto the Charizard, makes sense, and Federico is aware of this and switches out for that Incineroar.
That's right, the Incineroar coming back in, dropping that Intimidate, lowering that physical attack stat. Meanwhile, Grimmsnarl goes for a trick onto the Incineroar, which of course was once the Charizard, meaning that because Incineroar is Dark-type, it's immune to the Prankster-boosted trick move, as we see Precipice Blades coming out from Mattie. Thanks to the Shucker Berry on Federico's Incineroar, it doesn't take as much damage as it would have done. But we see a Heat Crash coming out from Groudon into the Grimmsnarl, and it is enough to pick up the knockout. It's a critical hit. I'm not sure that mattered, but it was very cool to see Mattie attempting to go for the trick on what I assume he was thinking would be a Gigantamax Charizard on Federico's side of the field, but now the Grimmsnarl has gone down, that option is no longer available to him.
Yeah, exactly, and I think in this scenario, being able to still allow to have the Charizard on the field in the back, should I say, it makes a lot of sense. You want to be able to finish up with that Dynamax if you can. You know that your Charizard's not going to be going down to a Behemoth Blade from a Zacian from Mattie's side. Even if, of course, it deals huge amounts of damage, it's not quite enough to deal a one-hit KO. So in this scenario, going for the Heat Crash, if you're Federico, from his Groudon, tries to go ahead and ensure the KO has been picked up on. You are not subject to any sort of Precipice Blades missing. So all in all, I think very safe and solid play coming out from Federico to bring this 3 versus 3 now scenario.
That's right, the Grimmsnarls are gone on both sides of the field, so no shenanigans coming out from them for the remainder of this game. As we see Mattie contemplating a Gigantamax here, and he's locking in his move for the Groudon as well. Against the Incineroar and the Groudon on Federico's side of the field. Mattie will be so relieved to have that Grimmsnarl out the way this time, and Federico to a certain extent as well, even though Mattie's Grimmsnarl didn't pose as many problems for him. But we do indeed see the Gigantamax from Mattie onto his Charizard, and this time he'll be looking to get maximum value out of this Gigantamax. Charizard is in the sun, it's got its solar power ability, it can set up chip damage via its Gmax Wildfire. It's in a good position.
It's in a good position, and we definitely don't see any Grimmsnarl, so it has to be in a good position. So that is good. We do see Dynamax also coming out from Federico's side right now.
Ooh.
If this is a Max Rockfall, we may get a reveal of a weakness policy on Mattie's Charizard if it so chooses to be going into that slot, if it can, of course, survive it. But we don't actually see a Wildfire. We just see a Max Airstream into that Incineroar slot. Not quite enough to pick up a KO, but it boosts not only its own, but as well as its partner Groudon speed, which allows the Precipice to come out immediately after, pick up the KO on Incineroar, and deal a bit of chip damage onto this Dynamax Groudon over on Federico's side.
That's right, and we see the Max Quake coming out from Federico's Dynamax Groudon into Mattie's non-Dynamax Groudon, which is going to boost its special defense, something it would want to do in front of the Charizard, but now the sun fades, which is not the position that Charizard wants to be in. It wants to have its moves boosted by the sun. But now it's gone, and Charizard won't be able to set the sun back up because in its Gigantamax form, all its fire type moves become Gmax Wildfire rather than Max Flare, as we see Federico's Charizard coming in on his side of the field.
Yeah, and we've got a situation where we know that Mattie's Pokemon are both faster than Federico's, so they do definitely have the advantage. There could be a potential Rock Slide or Rock Tomb coming out from Mattie's Groudon, which of course Federico is aware of, hence why he opted to go for the Protect on the Charizard. As the Gmax Wildfire, though, is going to be coming out. No Light Screen is able to deal a bit more damage onto that Groudon than would have been with the screen still up.
That's right, the Stone Edge coming out from the Groudon, and that is a big reveal for Federico onto the protected Charizard, because that is a move that could deal huge damage to it. As we see another Max Quake from Federico's Dynamax Groudon into Mattie's smaller Groudon, boosting the special defenses further, and it really benefited from the special defense boost from the previous turn, taking the Gmax Wildfire coming out from the Charizard this turn. But that residual damage is now very nicely set up for Mattie.
Yeah, it really is, and I think the fact that even though we've got a lot of special defensive boosts going for both of Federico's Pokemon, we're in a scenario where the Charizard is still subject to a KO from a Stone Edge, and this Groudon, though, however, on Federico's side, the Dynamax, is not yet subject to a KO from Mattie's Charizard, so I may expect Mattie to want to try to preserve his own Groudon, maybe to try to take care of this Charizard later on in the game, towards the end game, but we don't actually see that being the case, as we see Max Rockfall actually coming out from Mattie's Charizard, paying out a favor to Federico's this time.
That's right, we see the Max Rockfall. Charizard is of course doubly weak to rock type moves, being part fire, part flying type, and that Charizard goes instantly down as a Precipice Blaze comes out from Mattie's Groudon, which deals decent damage to the Groudon, as Groudon responds with a Max Rockfall into Mattie's Gigantamax Charizard, and wow, look at that. That health bar went straight from full to empty because of that double weakness of the Charizard to rock type moves and a Dynamax rock type move at that. But one could argue that Mattie's Charizard had got a decent amount out of its Dynamax this time, especially compared to the last game. So perhaps Mattie was willing to take the risk there, willing for his Charizard to go down this turn.
Most definitely, and I think no Charty Berry, more problems, but there was the Reflect that previously could have potentially allowed this Charizard to survive. Not the case. Charizard's out for the count, and we do have Mattie having the Zacian available. Zacian, especially at that low HP sort of range that Federico's Groudon's on, should be enough to pick up this game 2 for Mattie and force a game 3.
That's right, indeed, Costa. We see the Behemoth Blade going into the Groudon, and yeah, absolutely. We see the tables have turned as opposed to game 1, and the Groudon goes straight down to the Behemoth Blade, and we're going into a game 3 who will win this, to see who will win this top 8 match between Mattie Morgan and Federico.
Yeah, and I think very, very solid play for Mattie to be able to come back. I think Federico's been playing, amazing as well, similar to sort of trying to keep up with Mattie's play, but I think Mattie was much more safe in regards to his strategy going into this. He's like, right, okay, I had a really, really tough game 1. Let me try to clear my head and try to strategize to see how I could better turn this round and not let Federico try to get away with this. And he did it very, very well to be able to have the Grimmsnarl as switches, as well as the Groudon for any potential Thunder Waves coming out, and the nullification of them was really great to see from him. And I think he did an excellent job for being able to bring it back, choose the right moment to get the Dynamax going, and he had that max airstream, which gave the speed advantage to his own Charizard and Groudon subsequently.
That's right, that speed boost was very crucial, and I really got the impression in that game, Costa, that as soon as Federico's Grimmsnarl was removed or thereabouts, Mattie was like, okay, foot on the gas, let's go, let's wrap up this game. And that's exactly what it is, and that Groudon, even though it did have very boosted special defense, when it's not in its Dynamax form against the physical attackers of Zacian and Groudon on Mattie's side of the field, those special defense boosts go for nothing, because, of course, that won't help against the physical attackers in Zacian and Groudon.
Yeah, it definitely won't. And even in Dynamax, you've got the Behemoth Blade, which completely ignores the Dynamax boost as well, right, of HP. So you got a scenario where I think Mattie made an excellent turn 1, or was it turn 2, where essentially took advantage of the passive play from Federico's side and positioned himself to the point where, like you said, he was able to dispatch of that Grimmsnarl, which all of a sudden, like you said, it was able to just put the pedal to the metal and essentially run away with the game, quite literally, with the max airstream, tailwind boost flying over him. Without the tailwind effects, of course, but yeah, it was great to see. And it does really build up to this game 3 and what we're about to experience.
Absolutely, and it seems like there's a tailwind behind us now, Costa, as we're straight into Game 3 with Grimmsnarl and Incineroar coming out from both players. A little reminiscence of Game 1. It's very interesting to see Mattie going back to this lead, given it didn't work out well for him in the Game 1, but maybe he has some kind of tricks up his sleeve, potentially quite literally, given his Grimmsnarl is running Trick.
Yes, that is exactly the case. And once again, we are seeing the exact same mirror of Game 1 leads. So in this scenario, there's a lot of options that could be made. There are going to be switch outs, starting off with Mattie's Grimmsnarl, switching out for the Groudon, which is going to try to directly threaten Federico's Pokemon.
That's right. Incineroar doesn't love facing down a Groudon, but of course, because we know that Federico's Incineroar is holding a Sugar Berry, it will be able to deal with any ground-type moves better. We see a parting shot coming out from Mattie's Incineroar into the Grimmsnarl, so it's going to go right back, and Mattie's going to be able to get a switch into another Pokemon. Meanwhile, Grimmsnarl's offensive stats are lowered, though of course Grimmsnarl is not a Pokemon that tends to want to attack, it's more of a supportive one. As we see Grimmsnarl coming back in for Mattie in place of the Incineroar.
Yes, and we're actually seeing a bit of the speed interactions going on there. Federico's Incineroar being slower does mean that he's able to get the jump on Mattie's Grimmsnarl and automatically bring it down to a -1 attack stat stage. So, whilst also going ahead and bringing in his own Groudon. So, once again, we get another turn with the same exact Pokemon on the field.
That's right, and these players are going to be taking any chances this game. This will decide who goes through to the next round of the competition. This will decide who gets to say a strong farewell to Galar, as opposed to one they wish they could have changed. And we see a double Precipice Blades connect from Mattie's Groudon and a critical hit on the Grimmsnarl, as Federico's Groudon responds with the Precipice Blades, which deals a more modest amount of damage, as we see a reveal of foul play from Federico's Grimmsnarl onto the Groudon on Mattie's side of the field. It's down to just over half of its health here.
Yes, it definitely is, and I think in this scenario, just being able to chip away at your opponent's Pokemon is the best strategy, because you will open up the door to allow for a free switch in once there is a KO, and that already changes the board state. So getting those screens up right now from both of these Grimmsnarls makes a lot of sense, and we see Mattie's going ahead and successfully, in the aid of the critical hit from the previous turn, pick up the KO from that onto that Grimmsnarl, as the Precipice Blades over from Federico's Groudon is going to try to give a bit of payback and deal a bit more damage, accurately connecting with both of them, of course, whilst also pushing them beneath half of their HP's worth.
That's right, I think this is massive for Mattie now. He's got rid of that main threat to his Dynamax, and so he might be angling to do that at some point. Maybe not currently, because neither of the Pokemon on his side of the field right now have that much health remaining, but that's absolutely something he can tick off. As we see Incineroar coming in for the Groudon, which is going to lower the physical attack of the Groudon. The Charizard on Federico's side, of course, doesn't mind too much about that being more of a special attacker coster.
Yeah, it most definitely doesn't, and I do really like Mattie's choice here. You've got the option of going for the trick on the Charizard if it does want to go on Dynamax and doesn't play defensively and go for a Protect here, being aware of this, which I am expecting Federico to go for the Protect on Charizard here, especially with that repositioning of the Incineroar being brought onto the field, available for the Fake Out the subsequent turn.
Yeah, and there is a trick coming out there from the Grimmsnarl into the protected Charizard, which, of course, was once the Pokemon that Federico had out beforehand, which I believe was the Grimmsnarl. But we now see Mattie locking in his moves for his Grimmsnarl and Incineroar. These turns of Sun on the field are ticking away. Of course, both players have their ground, and they will be able to set up that Sun right back. But of course, the preferred conditions for the Charizard will be in the Sun. So that'll be something that both players will be looking to do, keeping an eye on the Sun turns remaining.
Yes, and we do have one final turn of Sun remaining, as we saw Mattie double check as well, as 2 more turns of Reflect and 3 of Light Screen. So Federico, on the other hand, from his side of things, is going to be switching and bringing that Groudon in on the field, going for the Fake Out onto the Incineroar, stopping it from moving, and we saw it didn't try to go for any sort of priority-based moves, and Groudon actually is tricked. It's got the Lagging Tail item attached to it and has had its Assault Vest taken away and been given straight over to Grimmsnarl.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's something you really want for a Grimmsnarl, to be honest, because Grimmsnarl is something that wants to go for those supportive moves, and holding an Assault Vest, it means it can only go for attacking moves. So I'm not sure who really benefited the most out of that turn, but either way, we see a parting shot coming out from Mattie's Incineroar, going into the ground on Federico's side of the field, reducing the damage it can deal out, and running straight back to Mattie to be replaced with something in the back, which Mattie is just deciding on here, and it's his Groudon that's going to come back out onto the field, and we did see the Groudon there holds its own Assault Vest, so we have a double Assault Vest on Mattie's side of the field.
Yes, as we are going to be seeing the parting shot coming out from Federico, of course, seeing the immediate effects of the following turn for the Lagging Tail from Groudon, now having it, of course. The Incineroar is going to be faster than it, or at least it's going to be seen to be the case, whilst it is within the same sort of priority bracket. We're going to be seeing Mattie's Grimmsnarl go for the Spirit Break, and actually connecting with that Charizard, dropping its special attack by 1 stage, which is definitely not what Federico is wanting to see, but he's able to successfully connect with both Precipice Blades onto the Grimmsnarl and Groudon, whilst Mattie's Reflect is no longer.
That's right, we see the Grimmsnarl and Groudon on Mattie's side of the field both being taken down into the red here. And as you say, Costa, that Charizard, which on Federico's side of the field, which may well be angling for a Gigantamax, that's not a play he may want to make in this position with a drop to its special attack. Of course, Charizard can still deal out some significant damage in the sun and with its solar power ability. But even so, if Federico's looking to get the absolute maximum out of his Dynamax, it might be worth withdrawing his Charizard for something else that's in the back.
Yes, as we are going to be seeing the Incineroar now switch in for Mattie's side, being able to have the Intimidate impacted onto that Groudon, having its damage output reduced, of course, whilst having the Fake Out available for the subsequent turn. As we're going to be seeing, Federico's actually going to have a bit of a same sort of light bulb moment, thinking, right, okay, I'm going to try to go ahead and match your instant switch by bringing my own and having its own Fake Out available, as he's actually going to commit to that -1 special attack Charizard, as it may be very crucial to try to get some wildfire residual damage dealt, especially in the sun.
Absolutely. There comes a point where you have to say, well, I'm never going to get my Gigantamax Pokemon in the perfect position, so this will have to do. And as we said, the Charizard will still be able to deal massive damage in the sun, boosted by the solar power ability, as it goes for an Airstream, which will boost the speed of the Pokemon on Federico's side of the field. As we see a Spirit Break coming out from Grimmsnarl, which is going to lower its special attack further, unfortunately. So the damage output of this Charizard really now is looking a little bit dwindling, Copter.
Yes, it most definitely is, as Light Screen is now going to wear off from both of these trainers' side of the field. And we do have the Charizard Prime in a position to just try to go ahead and better adjust itself, position itself to the point where it is going to be assisting both its partner with Max Airstreams as well as the Wildfire. Over time, you want to try to make sure that you are getting rid of at least as many slots as you can to bring in the real threats from Mattie's side, that being the Groudon and Zacian.
That's right, and we see a Fake Out coming out from Incineroar on Federico's side of the field, and a G-Max Wildfire going into that Grimmsnarl, even though it's taken those attack drops. Of course, the Grimmsnarl was on such low health that really anything would have been able to pick it up there, and crucially, Federico's been able to set up the residual damage from that G-Max Wildfire, as it takes a little bit of solar power chip. The cost that Charizard takes for dealing so much damage boosted by the solar power, it loses a little bit of its health at the end of each turn. As now Mattie has to decide who to bring in place of the Grimmsnarl. The stakes couldn't be higher. These players, this will decide who goes through to the next round of the competition. The other one will be going out. So really is crucial that Mattie makes these calls correctly.
No, it really, really is. And I think having that ancient power accessible to Mattie is very, very crucial here, as you're going to be able to directly threaten that Charizard, whilst I'm not sure if Federico's Charizard can sort of relate to the same extent. And in this scenario, we just want to try to make sure, if you're Mattie, that you're capitalizing off of the amount of Dynamax turns you have available. You need to try to wear your opponent down to the point where you can capitalize and immediately try to end the game, or at least better position yourself speed control wise, as that seems to be what Federico's has been trying to go for the past couple of turns.
That's right, and of course Mattie has the Dynamax advantage at this point. He hasn't used it yet, and Federico's will end very soon after this next turn. And we do see Mattie committing to his own Dynamax. It's time. We've seen a couple of late game, very good Dynamaxes here, Costa, and perhaps this will be another one. Only time will tell. But we have Big Charizard versus Big Charizard, and they'll be wanting to remove each other as swiftly as they possibly can. And of course the sun is still up, so both of the Charizards will be able to deal big damage. Mattie's potentially more because of the special attack drops on Federico's Charizard, and we see an Airstream going into the Incineroar on Mattie's side of the field, boosting the speed of both Pokemon on Federico's side even further.
Yeah, and as a direct result of that Incineroar now having additional speed assisted by the Max Airstream, it does mean it will outspeed Mattie's Charizard and will get a parting shot off, being able to bring it down to -1 of its special attack, which means it will not be dealing as much damage as it would have originally. But will that matter is the real question, as the Max Rockball goes into the Charizard and does pick up the KO whilst changing the weather, as Federico's Groudon does land on the field.
That's right, Federico's Groudon brought the sun, but Charizard on Mattie's side brought the sandstorm. And Charizard on Federico's side goes down. Its Dynamax turns were over, but now, of course, Mattie has 2 turns of Dynamax to play with in face of Federico's Pokemon, which can no longer Dynamax. So tentatively, Mattie is looking like he's in a good position, but of course these players are going to fight it out to the bitter end, and we'll have to see, because of course, as we've just seen there, both of Mattie's Pokemon in the back are on very low HP.
Yes, they most definitely are, but I think Position-wise, Mattie looks to be doing much, much better right now. He's got the availability of Charizard. He's got that max airstream that is on the field and allows his Charizard to now be faster, whilst the Groudon has just barely survived on 7 hit points, even with this Incineroar switching in. I think Mattie can just directly deal with this Incineroar if he wants to, especially powered in the sun with the max Rockfall if he so chooses to, unless he targets that Groudon with the Wildfire.
That's right, and that does seem to be what he's choosing to do here. Of course, the Incineroar coming in, dropping an Intimidate on the Groudon on Mattie's side of the field, which was a very clutch survival just then, but the Charizard doesn't mind too much about it being a special attacker rather than a physical attacker. And yeah, this Charizard here is an absolute Behemoth, and with no Zacian in the pack, there's no Behemoth blade that could come out. Meanwhile, we see a Wildfire coming out into the ground on Federico's side, and that picks up the knockout. Critical hit, I'm not sure that mattered. That was just a flex. The Groudon on Federico's side goes down.
Yes, it does, leaving this Incineroar all on its own, being crashed by heat from what it looks like even within. Sun is not the best, but this is a Fire Kitty. It will definitely try to resist, deal a bit of Flare Blitz damage, pick up the KO naturally onto that 8 hit point. Groudon goes down, but in this scenario, we've got, I think Mattie's pretty much got the game ensured. We've got Incineroar coming in, Fake Out pressure, and what a way to kind of bring this back from Mattie.
Absolutely. I always love to see a trainer who, even though they go down in the first game, wins the next 2 and takes it back. What a vindication for Mattie. Especially, I feel so pleased for him, especially after that very sad Dynamax or Gigantamax of his Charizard in game 1 with a triple paralysis on its Dynamax turns. We see the Incineroar going for a Protect. It's not a move we often see on Incineroar, but it just feels to me, Costa, like it's a little bit too little too late.
It really is. That's a cool reveal that I feel like maybe at an earlier point could have been really nice. But sure, I can understand from Federico, you got to play it out until you get the final verdict. But in this scenario, it is looking a bit little too late. You've got the potential of this Charizard still having access to that ancient power, even if it has lost. It's a Gigantamax at the moment. It can still threaten that super effective damage, whilst, of course, the Incineroar can deal a bit more damage via either the Flare Blitz or maybe even reducing the damage of Federico's Incineroar with a Parting Shot.
That's right, and the Ancient Power isn't, to be fair, quite enough to pick up the Incineroar, even with a critical hit, but we do see a Parting Shot coming out from Mattie's Incineroar, just to give there no wiggle room for any kinds of critical hit shenanigans from the Incineroar on Federico's side of the field, as we see it go for a Flare Blitz into Mattie's Incineroar. Oh, and it survives on 1 HP, it's not quite enough to be taken out. As Charizard takes some solar power damage there. And the Incineroar on Federico's side on the field is, of course, on incredibly low health as well.
Yes, it seems like the invisible, partly broken Focus Sash is back on the screen. But, of course, that does mean Mattie Morgan has just gone ahead and progressed to the top 4, dispatching of Federico Camporesi. Commiserations, of course, to Federico. I think he played a subliminal set versus Mattie. Of course, there's a bit of hacks going on in favor of Federico for game 1, but being able to match Mattie at the current stage and the sort of level of board state changes and syncing between all of these sort of prioritization of which Pokemon will win me this battle, the sort of like the dark horse sort of figure that you're wanting to try to bring out at the back, namely being the Charizard from what we've seen from both of the trainers. He did really well to keep up with the pace, but Mattie was just able to best him out of that.
That's right, Costa. It's as opposed to our very first game that we cast today. That was a longer one, in for the longer haul. Goes to show the strategizing that has to be taking place. So, congratulations to Mattie progressing to the next round. We're going to cut to what should be a very quick break, and we'll be right back.